So I'm Mike Lewin, director of the Toro Land Use Institute for our latest video podcast with Sara Bronin of Cornell Law School. And also Sara has been, I guess it was a chair of the National, it was an advisory commission on historic preservation. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's the Federal Historic Preservation Agency. So it's called the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, but it has pretty significant regulatory responsibilities as well.
And joining me as a co-host is Jennifer Casey of the Suffolk County Planning Commission and also the chair of the Land Use Institute's board. So we're here primarily to talk about the National Zoning Atlas, as you can see from Professor Bronin's background. So I guess, sorry.
Tell us about it. How did it happen? How did that come to be, since you helped lead that effort?
Sure. So if anybody wants to follow along, it's at zoningatlas.org. It is a project that really came out of an advocacy effort related to zoning reform in Connecticut. We, in that state, have 169 towns and cities. And the question that we were trying to figure out was, how do we understand zoning across all of these towns and cities? I developed a methodology that our team used there to read through 32,000 pages of zoning codes.
Wow.
Worked with a local nonprofit organization, the Connecticut Data Collaborative, to put it up on a map. And we're still basically using those same methods today, but we're building out the entire country. So it's been a 4-year project. And for the last 2 years, we've had staff dedicated to the effort. And so far in the National Zoning Atlas, we've completed 8 states and Washington, D.C., and about 5,800 jurisdictions out of about 30-something thousand are posted to the map.
Wow.
So check it
out. What states have you done so far?
Hawaii, Arizona, Nevada, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. I think I'm missing one there, but DC. We're almost done with New Mexico and Colorado. It's 99% done. I think we have just a couple jurisdictions there. So
how do you choose which states? How do you choose which states to do first?
We actually had partners in New Hampshire and Rhode Island that did the bulk of the work on those atlases. For the others, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, we did in-house. We also had some partners out in Hawaii that built the Hawaii Zoning Atlas. And there it's 4 jurisdictions, interestingly, not the 169. So it's easy to complete a state when it has 4 counties, but those counties are pretty complex in how they regulate land use just because of the scarcity of land out there. In DC, we had a partner and a staff member of the Urban Institute, Yona Freemark. So in some cases, we've had partners. In other cases, actually from this point going forward, it's the central team, which now has 27 full-time staff members that are completing the states. And we're working right now in Utah. We'll complete California hopefully this year. We're working in North Carolina and Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and hopefully soon Michigan as well.
Is New York going to be the last one on the list? I would think.
Interestingly, we actually started so that as for me, the second place that I focused my efforts was actually New York State. And I had a class a few years ago that covered the Ithaca, Binghamton area, which is an area in upstate New York. We also had an external team that logged Long Island. We had some help in New York City from Fordham Law School. But we have logged about 521 of the state's 1,500 jurisdictions. So we're about a third of the way done in New York State. Again, we've done New York City, Long Island, all of the New York City suburbs on the New York side, none on the New Jersey side as of yet. But we've done the Buffalo area, Rochester area, Syracuse area. We've done Albany, but not the Albany area. So we're working our way through the top metros, and at some point we'll get through the remaining 1,000 jurisdictions.
And do you have a mechanism to update when different jurisdictions update their code in any way? Is there something that's built into that program?
So we have on the back end logging all of the information about zoning in these 30,000+ jurisdictions around the country, a database that enables us to retire districts that have been become obsolete or whose boundaries have changed, and then log the date of that change and update it. We've already done that in Connecticut, which is one of the first states to have been built. The New Hampshire team has provided some updates. We do that as people tell us that the zoning codes have been updated. In Montana too, there was statewide zoning reform, as there was in Connecticut, shortly after both of those atlases were completed. So we're also working in Montana to update the map. We have logged about 620,000 pages of zoning codes that were read and posted to the map. So
Wow.
there's a lot of information that's up there already, and the updates are critically important. I mean, I'll just give you an example. New York City just did a City of Yes, that big zoning update. And now we have to figure out, all right, this is actually quite detailed because of the way they wrote the rules. It's sort of south of 96th Street and then north. And so then we have to create basically new districts that satisfy the criteria of the underlying base districts and the new districts. So that's going to take a little while. And I don't have staff set aside for New York at this point. So if there's anybody out there who wants to see New York City updated on the map, feel free to send some support our way, and we could get that done a little faster.
You know what I find very interesting? We've spent time up in Lubec, Maine. We have a home up there, and it's the easternmost part of the United States. And
Oh, wow.
having spent so much time in New York and on Long Island, which is so regulated, it was shocking to find out how they have like no zoning regulations up there except for their waterfront. I mean, there's this like photocopied document on their website that you have to look to for, you know, those issues, because it's kind of a peninsula. So everything's about the watermark. But in terms of how houses are built or all those kind of things, there's no kind of regulation. So it's kind of interesting. And I'm sure you've seen a big difference between certain areas about how regulated some areas are and other areas aren't as regulated. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you found. I mean, this is what I've seen just in my real life. So I'm sure you've seen a lot looking at all these codes.
Your real life is actually already up on the National Zoning Atlas. Lubec is up and posted as having no zoning, along with 110 other jurisdictions in Maine that we've so far identified to not have zoning. So there's 500 counties and towns in Maine in total that could have zoning. We've knocked out 111, including Lubec, that doesn't have zoning, and that's about 22% of the state.
But they want to change it though. There's been a recent push, and they're trying to get monies to help them do. And the person they were helping do it, we were like, anyway, it's a long story. But they are. I think it's going to change in the next couple of years because of issues that have arisen that they may actually regulate.
Well, you certainly see up and down the Maine coast issues related to sea level rise and where development is happening and where it's allowed. And there are, I'm just eyeballing it right now because I have the map open. There are about 15 jurisdictions on the coast which don't have zoning. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of those come back and say, well, you know, as there's pressure to build, not necessarily in every part of Maine, but, you know, the coast is one place I think where people do find, you know, so largely rural that maybe there's not development pressures, but I would imagine on the coast, and then you could come up against sea level rise and the issues that will cause. And, you know, zoning can help to play a role in trying to manage that and plan for any additional growth. So I wouldn't be surprised if more of these communities do think and look to zoning as a way to address some of the issues that they're seeing.
And they've had more extreme weather. I know last September, a year ago, this past September, there was a massive hurricane that came through that our home was built a long, long time ago, but suffered significant damage from this hurricane. And they never had hurricanes up there. It only slightly hit the top portion of Maine, was mostly in Canada. But I think extreme weather is going to also affect zoning, because it's a real challenge if houses aren't built to any type of code to withstand this type of sea level rise, as well as other type of wind, which has been increased up there tremendously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to hear about that happening to you and happening to your community, but extreme weather is something that we're seeing across so many different dimensions. And again, not just sea level rise, but heavy winds, extreme, hurricanes, and also, of course, wildfires, as we see out in Los Angeles. And our land use planning and zoning laws is the way that land use planning, where the rubber hits the road, because that actually tells people what they can do. I don't think it's really caught up to the threats that we see. So that's certainly an application of the National Zoning Atlas, and something that I focus on in my own scholarship as well.
Do you think, as a result of some of the stuff, especially on California and the devastation, that some zoning regulations may change in order to rebuild like sections of Altadena or Pacific Palisades that were completely decimated?
The current response has been so far that zoning, that the rebuilding will happen exactly as it was before. I'm hopeful that as we really start the rebuilding effort in earnest, that we can think about different ways to approach those areas, which have for many years been under threat.
And can you tell us a little bit about the National Zoning Atlas, what its use and application are for lay people or other zoning and planning people? What is the goal of compiling all this information and making it accessible?
Sure. So, one of the main tools is pretty simple. It's to enable people to see how their communities zone. And for us, the impetus for the Atlas was really the advocacy effort in Connecticut, and having people understand how their own town zone, I think helped them to take part in and understand why the advocacy was needed and why changes to zoning were needed. So I would say that that's one of the first things that our zoning atlas is intended to reveal. I'm looking to see if there's a share button, and maybe there's not. Oh yeah, there is. If I can share, maybe I can also kind of point out a couple of other things that
I just allowed that
we've been working on. Great. So great.
Cool.
So just to kind of give people a sense, and since you guys are out in Long Island, I'm going to search for New York, and I'm going to let's go to Suffolk County. Now we're really going to put you on the spot, Jennifer, and see how your community zones. So, just to give you
I'm specifically in Huntington. If you want to do Huntington, that's where I am, which is
okay. Well, we'll do that actually. And I'll zoom out just a tiny bit. But what selecting a jurisdiction does is it allows you to see what's happening in that area. But I'll zoom out just a tiny bit. So what the zoning atlas does is we've read all these regulations, we've put them in a map, and that enables us to see, for example, how this is the first filter that I'll show you, where people can build single family housing. And across much of Long Island, across even New York City, you can see there in the bottom left area, you can see 94% of Huntington, and a huge chunk of the rest of Long Island allows for single family housing. Now I'm just going to click on this, and now the map is turned totally white, which means that the only places that you can build apartments are which are shown in purple on the map, just 4% of land in Huntington. And again, the rest of Long Island, very similarly, has just little specks, maybe one lot at a time here and there for multifamily housing. By contrast, you look over here at New York City, where my was showing, and of course, a lot of New York City Manhattan allows for multifamily housing as of right. You can also look for other things like, if you're a homeowner, we know that people have used the atlas to figure out where they can build an accessory dwelling. So that's like a mother-in-law apartment, they sometimes call, or even potentially a rental unit. Actually, Huntington seems to be the front lines of where the Long Island bans on ADUs start. So,
well, I know there are, because my first home out here in 2000 was a house with an accessory dwelling unit. There's a lot of rules put on it. So maybe that's why they're not popping up as much, because you have to own the home in order to maintain an apartment, and they have a lot of rules and laws. But I know there still are. I mean, I have a friend who's the judge for the accessory dwelling unit and monitors that, and have a neighbor that has one. I just had to notarize an application for him. So it may not come up because there's so many hurdles to have them.
Yeah, so this is where it comes up. So that first filter was an as of right. So you can go into
Gotcha.
and do it. But you're right that accessory dwelling units to the right of that front line are allowed subject to a public hearing in more places. But then when you get down to like occupancy restrictions, they all have the public hearing requirement and they have occupancy restrictions, which it sounds like in Huntington, like a lot of communities, will be an owner occupancy requirement, will be a renter prohibition, will be a family member requirement. And
Can't be in
so
can't be in a basement any longer. It has to be a certain
detached.
percentage smaller than the main unit. Like there's a lot of,
Yeah, which is why when we chose to use this filter, show me where people can build accessory housing units, and our little eye says as of right, we chose to display the as of right. So to give people a really good sense of where accessory dwelling units are more freely allowed. Like you can go
Yeah.
into, you can get it that day. And then when you go into advanced filters, you can see where they are allowed, but with these other restrictions that actually, frankly, probably result in many fewer apartment
I
accessory
agree.
units getting built. So what this does is it really paints a picture, and you can see too, how this plays out. So the single family housing in Connecticut and Westchester County and all of these sort of counties up and down the Metro North line. There's a lot of, and my map is loading right now, but there's a lot of purple, and that just means that these are the areas where single family housing can be built. So overall,
What does a darker purple mean on the map?
it means those are and I'll drop down the legends and layers. Those are the mixed with residential zoning.
Oh, okay.
So those are the areas where you have a mix of uses. So here, this rural agricultural up in Marlborough, that's an unusual one, but that's probably where industrial agriculture is allowed. We count that as a mixed use. Here, there's a resort area. Here, there's an industrial area in South Windsor, Connecticut, that allows multifamily. So when you hover over some of these places, you can kind of see what that. So here's residential / corporate park in South Connecticut. So again, we've logged all kinds of districts. Here's Shelter Island, the business district, which allows housing.
Very tiny.
Yeah, everything that allows purple allows residential, but the lighter purple is what we would mostly consider to be, suburban style development, which is typical of much of the rest of the country. So I'll stop sharing now, but I just thought your readers or watchers.
That's great.
So in Manhattan, where I live, there isn't really such an issue with use. The major distinctions are really like height and density. In other words, so you can build apartments almost every place, but some places they can be this tall, and some places they can be that tall. So do your charts account for that?
Yes, so we do have significant information about height information, including the number of stories as well as the number of feet, because zoning codes keep those in different ways, that up to which a building can be built. And I have a paper called Zoning by 1,000 Cuts. It came out in the Pepperdine Law Review in 2023 that documents Connecticut, where we found that I think 88 or 90% of land that's zoned for residential has a height cap, which means that even where you see permission to build multifamily, it's literally capped by height cap, which is one of the reasons why we thought it was really important to log those characteristics.
I think something else interesting in Manhattan that's happened. You have a lot of, I in my legal work, I do a lot of work with landowners with construction labor law cases, but I've seen buildings that have been converted from business to residential, especially down in the Wall Street area. So that must be something you have to update too when buildings go from an office building to residential. And I'm sure we'll see other buildings change or not. Who knows? It seemed like there was a lot of occupancy in a lot of commercial buildings, but then there's some back to work orders. So we'll see how that plays out. But that's something else I'm sure that you have on your compendium as to whether it's a residential building or a commercial building.
We don't log as built conditions. We log
Okay,
the regulations.
gotcha.
We have,
Would regulations change? I don't know this, and maybe Michael might know too, because it's not my expertise, but when buildings go from commercial to residential, are they rezoned then? Do they have to go before some body to change it from that to that?
yeah, so in some cases they do. So if there's a change in the zoning district, they do. And when there is a change in the zoning district, sometimes the town planner will reach out to us and let us know. In fact, I just got an email right before this saying that planner in Palisade, Colorado had reached out with updated GIS for our team. But that doesn't always happen. And so we do have to figure out as a team, a more systematic way of tracking all of these updates over time. So to be continued, but that's something on our radar screen, because certainly zoning codes change in response to applications, in response to changed conditions, and we should be there ready to log it.
Do you have a goal as to when you want to have everything, the atlas done? Is there a date that you think you'll have all the states in there?
Oh, I think as soon as possible. So we're almost 6,000, a sixth of the way to a fifth of the way done. So we are seeking funding on a variety of fronts to try to get the project done. We typically operate on the basis of geography. So somebody has said to us, okay, go finish California zoning. And so now we have the funding for that. And that's how we're building our team. And that's how we're dedicating our work. So
And where are most of your funding sources from?
foundations. So foundations that are interested in housing or equality or economic development, small business. And they're all listed on our website.
That's great.
In Long Island, we had a couple of local foundations partner with the Regional Plan Association, which did the first sweep of Long Island data. So that's a good example of a place where we've seen a variety of institutional supports for the project. And then we take that from here, and we've been doing some updates in Long Island as well. So, we just keep going as we get funding. So as soon as we continue to get funding enough for the country, we will finish the country.
And then what's your goal after finishing the country? Is it just more of a maintenance and updating? Is that what's going to happen with the project?
Well, we're already working with a variety of institutions on research projects that use our data. We are also in the nascent stages of developing a national preservation atlas, which would log historic districts. There's a lot of different local and state and federal laws that impact our ability to create the places that we want. And so I do think the next step in terms of subject matter from the zoning atlas would be a national preservation atlas.
That would be great. I was fortunate to spend some time working with Huntington on their Historic Preservation Commission, and it was very interesting work. That was before I ended up on the Suffolk County Planning Commission, but really interesting about, preservation and how important preservation is. And I think reuse of buildings rather than, keeping that fabric, especially to areas, is really important, because once buildings are gone, they're gone.
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate when that happens. So that's great work. Dad, you work out of are you up in Ithaca?
Well, I moved down to Washington, D.C. for
you did.
appointments. So I'm here this semester, but going back and forth to Ithaca. So we'll making it work.
Oh, that's good. I went to college up at Hobart William Smith, which I would drive through Ithaca on my way up there. So beautiful Ithaca.
It is. It's so beautiful. I love Ithaca. I love Cornell.
So
It's a good thing. Yeah.
I want to plug your book.
Oh, I
Yes,
should have
I read it
brought my
from
copy. I don't have one right.
I'm gonna have to get a copy of that. That looks good, Sarah.
So would you like to talk maybe about how the zoning atlas interacts with your book, and also just generally about the book?
Oh, sure. Thanks for bringing it. So it's called Key to the City: How Zoning Shapes Our World, and that's really the topic is zoning. And what I tried to do in the book, which I started really the idea for a few years ago, maybe around the same time as I started the National Zoning Atlas project. But it is actually less data heavy. So I'm I'm super into the data, the details, the intricacies of local regulation, as you can see with the National Zoning Atlas Project. And I'm fortunate to be surrounded by an awesome team there that is the same way. We're like, what are these zoning codes going to say? Let's read them all. But the book is really takes a more narrative approach and draws mostly from my experience leading the City of Hartford's Planning and Zoning Commission. So Hartford, the capital of Connecticut, an under-resourced city, largely minority city, 85% Black and Latino. And I had the privilege of serving on the Planning and Zoning Commission, including as chair for about 7 years. And through that process, I mean, I start the book with a walk that I did with a community leader there who when I became chair, I said, you know, I really need to get to know the city. So I need to walk around, literally walk in neighborhoods so I can like get to know them and get to understand their rhythms and then understand how the rules might apply. And walking around with that leader in the Upper Albany neighborhood, I realized just how many of the issues really that she was facing in her neighborhood were really zoning issues. I mean, for me, it's, you know, I don't know if it's just the way I think, but everything to me, so many things to me are zoning issues. And as we talked and as we actually worked together with other community leaders and members to revise the zoning code, it just became really clear to me that people didn't understand. They didn't make the connection. Even people who were very knowledgeable about their communities didn't make the connection between the rules on the page and what they were seeing in their communities. And so this book is my attempt to try to help people, whether they're law professors or not, you know, whether they're people who've ever been to a zoning meeting or not, understand how important this power is. So I hope it sheds light through stories, not necessarily through so much data, although there's little inklings of it sprinkled about, but through stories of different places, but rooted in Hartford, that zoning is really important.
You know, I see one of the biggest challenges is education and educating more planners. I find, especially on Long Island, that a lot of the local zoning and planning boards are filled with volunteers who don't have any zoning or planning background and don't necessarily care about zoning and planning backgrounds. They're placed on there for different reasons. And it's really a challenge on many levels when you have that, because you see what's built, which should not be built based upon, you know, there might be laws and rules, but they find ways to circumvent them to make sure certain projects are built, which I think is very challenging. But I think, you know, we don't have any colleges on Long Island or in Suffolk County, at least, that have planning degree programs, which I think would be great if we had. We have Stony Brook, which is a really amazing institution, is doing some great stuff. Would love to have them have a planning major, because I think that would help populate, you know, we need more younger planners. You know, I think that's important. And I think it's such a key thing. So I'm really excited to read your book. Michael, what was your thoughts about the book? Because I'm sure you read it.
Yeah, I did. I guess I mean, I feel like you could do something you could spend hours talking about, but the one thing I was thinking about, because you talk about how in Upper Albany and, you know, zoning is essentially like was very car centric, which I assume you've reformed that. Well, first of all, I guess, how much is a place do you feel like you've been successful in reforming the zoning code in places like Upper Albany? Maybe I should start with that.
Yeah, well, we totally rewrote the zoning code and adopted a new one unanimously in one night. So with a total overhaul, including for Upper Albany, but again, every neighborhood in the city in 2016. And the reason we were able to do that and do it collaboratively was because actually, going back to Jennifer's point, when I joined the commission, we had a commission that had been there for a while, and, you know, sort of was representative of homeowners and, you know, maybe the longtime residents generation. But I made it one of my big efforts to try to recruit people from all over the city, to recruit a more diverse commission that reflected the demographics of our community, and also very specifically to attract younger people with young kids like me, people who were renters, people who kind of had different perspectives on the city than what you typically see in a commission, which is longtime homeowners. And actually, you know, demographically, we've seen research that shows they're wealthier and whiter usually than the average community member, even within a community. So I think that, and having a more representative body, having a body of people who were maybe thinking about the full spectrum of people who lived and worked in our community really made a difference. And so we were able to change the zoning in Denise Best District in Upper Albany, and other places too. We eliminated minimum parking requirements and allowed for, actually required on the main avenue, not strip malls, which is what had been built over the last 50 years, but the kind of development that was built before that, which is multi-story buildings built up to the street. Again, reducing curb cuts by eliminating minimum parking requirements and so on. Also diversifying the kinds of businesses and uses that could happen up and down the main avenues across the city, and excluding gas stations and car washes, which we've seen really deteriorate our built environment in a city that's very historic, very walkable, very compact, and where a quarter or more of households don't have access to a car. So, I think sustainability, walkability, livability, these things all go hand in hand with health, with enjoyment of communities. And I'll just add one last thing, which is we included tree canopy coverage requirements in every new development, which we hope will over time enable us to see a cooler city, a calmer city, a more beautiful city. So a lot.
I would imagine, imagine that would make a big difference in places where there'd be a high demand for development. But I would also think of places like Upper Albany. When I think of Hartford, I don't exactly think of like it as a high demand city, especially in the outer boroughs. And the Upper Albany is the city. So
Totally right
like
about
Upper Albany, does anything get built at all? Does it matter?
You're totally right that that the city is not a high development intensity city in most of the areas. We have seen thousands of apartment buildings built downtown, where before we did the code change, there was a public hearing requirement for every new building downtown, which doesn't make sense if you want development, if you want to encourage growth. There's a lot of empty parking lots downtown, and hopefully over time those will change over with more permissive and smarter rules in zoning, and also changing market conditions, which of course are the drivers for all of that. But for the rest of the city, even if there's not major development demand, people still live there and people are still investing in the community, and there are small scale projects that are happening. And so even at a smaller scale, making sure that the rules of the game are kind of conform to how the city, I think, wants to live and grow. It was something that was really important. So
there's still some big business. I mean, I know it used to be the insurance capital, but there's still, I mean, my daughter goes to school up in New Hampshire. So when I drive from Long Island up to New Hampshire, I go through, my route is, I go through New Haven, up through 91 to Hartford, then up through Worcester, and there's traffic. There's cars, there's people, there's big buildings. I mean, there's stuff going on there, and I know there's some really nice suburbs around Hartford as well. I mean, there's people wanting to live in those areas, and rather than other much larger cities. I think it's a good place to raise a family. I'm sure, Sarah, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a compact city where, I mean, obviously my own case suggests you can really get involved in local government and in making, which I think is something that is very appealing and very manageable. But the book covers a lot of different stories in Hartford and other places too. And so I do hope your listeners check it out, because
I'm excited to check it out. I have a question. I know on Long Island, our big thing has been the past, 10, 15 years is transit oriented development, trying to redevelop areas near train stations to try to increase pedestrian, because Long Island for many years, everybody got in their car to go everywhere. So big push to redevelop downtowns, did you see that? I mean, I know there must be some mass transit going through Hartford.
We do have
trains go through.
Yeah, we do have a train station, as well as a Connecticut Fast Track, which is a bus rapid transit. And I think there are 5 or 6 stations within Hartford. And we zone those areas transit-oriented development, which is essentially the same type of zone as you would see in downtown. So we are hoping that will continue to spur on development around those stations. Broadly, we also, when we completed, just going back to the zoning atlas, the Connecticut zoning atlas, we found that across Connecticut, where I think there are 61 train and fast track stations, most of those stations were zoned for single family large lot housing. Same
Wow.
in Long Island, by the way, for the LAR, IRR,
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
the north lines in New York, leading out of New York City. And it's, you know, that you see these big investments in the stations, and then you see the zoning that doesn't match. I do think this is going to be an issue in the decade ahead, and the zoning
Yeah.
atlas is going to help us.
And I think it's changed a little bit. Like in Mineola, they've done some larger scale housing near the train station in Nassau County. I know in other areas like in Ronkonkoma, there's a lot of a lot of large housing, and in Wyandanch. So they've definitely, in Riverhead too, they're building a whole bunch of housing around the train station, which at a terminus there by the courthouse. So I think they're definitely realizing, and that's where they're getting the density. And you can get taller buildings, I think, too, by train stations because of that need for density. You know, there's a lot of challenges with housing, especially everywhere, but Long Island is one of them because, you know, everybody says they don't want it to be Queens, but you need to have housing for all kinds of people and not just single family homes, because that, you know, older adults don't want to be in single family homes. It's too much. The taxes are ridiculous. And the care and maintenance, and younger people can't afford houses. I mean, it's amazing what the prices are. And you even see that, and I'm sure Michael can comment, from New York City coming out, like the outer boroughs have become cost prohibitive. You have many young people living together in houses with renting rooms because you can't afford an apartment, which is really challenging on so many fronts. So I'm hoping, I know the governor of New York has been trying to push ADUs and other housing, but has had a lot of challenges.
Well, that's why I was really hoping we could complete the New York zoning atlas. We've gotten a third of the way. So again, there, I would love to complete the state. I would love to, you know, keep going because it's so important, especially when you have a governor who is interested in the policy solutions, but you can't necessarily make a good case. You can't make the best case for policy solutions until you know what is now. And that's what the zoning atlas enables us to do, is to know what zoning is now. And we've seen actually how it has successfully informed statewide legislative changes in other states, because we've, again, built a sort of irrefutable case that the zoning here is not working for the goals of the community. And at a bare minimum, like you point out, the goals should include diverse housing choices. So that's it's something in my hopes for 2025 is that we can figure out how to complete New York State.
Good luck.
Thanks.
But since you've done, I would love to offer our resources for anything on Long Island, but it seems like you got Long Island down. It's the other parts of New York that you still have the work to do.
Yeah,
it's a big state, a very diverse state.
Absolutely.
I mean, even in Suffolk County, we see such diversity because where I live is right on the border of Nassau County, but then we have lots of, on our planning commission, we have farmers because there's a large amount of farmland in Eastern Long Island. And you've got a very wealthy enclaves on the eastern end of Long Island. So it's a lot of competing different things going on. And we still, as opposed to Nassau County, still have some large swaths of land that's not developed. So it'll be interesting to see how and what happens to those pieces of land. People have a lot of concerns because of transportation challenges, which I'm sure goes hand in hand with some of the zoning stuff. You know, getting people around when you intensify the zoning. It's challenging. I think we have one other question. This is one of them. What's the strangest zoning your team has seen?
Oh my gosh, there is a lot. We actually did a Halloween series this year about crazy zoning. Today I just got off we have a Slack channel, which is where we share different things. And the area that somebody posted today was Village of East Ness, New Mexico, one of the states we're about to finish. It is hand drawn with colored pencil shadings for each of the lots. And in fact, I have to share my screen. This is just too good. We have a channel called Weird Zoning, actually, which again is kind of its own hilarious thing. But here's just the one thing that came in today, so people can see. I mean, is this?
Oh, wow.
So again, colored pencil, cursive over here. Here are the subdivisions. Green is commercial, not exactly the same green, but whatevs.
Hey, it's very neatly drawn.
Government. And, I mean, who knows when this was actually adopted? It's certainly been maintained as is from wherever it was adopted. There are pinholes in that map. We have Beverly Hills was just another one that got posted in that channel, where there are requirements for density that are specific to the context. And so they'll have, if you can have a certain amount of multifamily, if you are near a certain number of single family units, and if the lot width is a certain width, and if the streets are a certain width. And it's all of these different factors that tell you how big of an apartment building you can build. So Beverly Hills, again, one area where you might think, they at high cost of living, but you also see lots of regulation in some cities that goes far beyond where you might see it somewhere else. So we see everything, and we share it with each other as a team, and some of it is pretty disturbing. We found one city in Texas that the only two allowed uses were mobile homes and industrial uses.
Wow.
What does that tell you? Again, we can't make it up. It's just that is what we've seen in our travels. And
I guess it's the use defines the zoning, like people are using it that way. And so
but in the whole city,
in
the
that's
whole
crazy.
city, the only residential is mobile home.
Yeah.
So, but the environmental justice implications of that, okay, it's an industrial city where only people who choose to or must live in mobile homes can live. And is that because of the toxic pollution? And if so, why are we letting anybody live? I mean, it's just raises all of these questions.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I'm guessing my instinctive guess would be, as you said, I think you said when zoning was adopted, somebody just said, okay, well, we'll just make it what it already is. And I'm guessing it's probably not an area where there's a lot of development pressure.
That
could very well be it too.
It's amazing. I have one question. You said going back to California, because I was watching it. It was just crazy what was going on out there. But all the devastation on some of the houses in the Malibu area on the beach seem areas that they might not be able to build. You said earlier that they were going to build wherever there were houses before, but are they going to be allowed to build in certain areas, such on the beach like that, where there were once houses?
I think that at least what I've seen so far is that the plans are to allow for rebuilding exactly as it was before. But let's see if that changes over time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also participated in this Superstorm Sandy. They had like a team. We kind of went over everything that happened and what the lessons were learned. And one of the big things that was pushed was, some of these properties that were destroyed during flooding, that towns then took those properties over to make more of a softer border on the South Shore of Long Island, because that's one of the issues is having hardscape prevents, the natural ebb and flow of water, especially during, these disasters. I apologize for but that's I think very responsible. Some municipalities taking some of these properties that were once houses and realizing that because of the flooding and rising tides that homes shouldn't be there and instead make them into parks or open space. Have you seen any of that in other parts of the country?
So zoning has not been well used yet to manage retreat or to account for like a sea level rise or other conditions.
Yeah.
We've only seen a few places where communities have really made active decisions to move numbers of residents in anything more than one-offs. That is something that I think we will have to consider in the future.
Yeah, was it so Village of Patchogue is the one that did that. They had like 4 or 5 properties they did that with.
Actually, Jonathan Rosenblum wrote a paper about it, and it's called Sacrifice Zones. And it's an interesting take on the kinds of zoning moves that might be needed for us to actually plan for that. So I'll recommend that,
Oh, that's cool.
that piece for your watchers.
Well, the problem is when we put on our, our managed retreat hat, whatever you call it, hat, you might favor one set of policies, but then the problem is we put on our housing crisis hat, we favor very different policies. So that's why it's.
Well, I think it's looking, yeah, we've had some projects in Patchogue, because Patchogue has waterways that come up, inlets. And there was one that they wanted to put an assisted living facility with, multi-floors and stuff. And my challenge with that was you putting vulnerable people in a path where there might be flooding. In another part of the town where there might be flooding, they want to put a hotel. A hotel is very different than an assisted living facility. So I think it's also determining what kind of housing it is. Like, more of a temporary housing with a hotel could be built in an area where there might be flooding at some point, as opposed to where you have vulnerable adults with there's a flooding, because we know that there'll be some type of natural disaster on Long Island. It's not going to be the same thing that happened before, but something else. And what the other lessons learned is really being able to, you can't rely, if you choose to live in certain areas, you can't rely on the government to assist you. So that's a real challenge on Long Island, is you have, people of modest means that are living near water that can't afford, if their houses get destroyed, their oil tanks washed away. But then you have people, wealthier people that don't need flood insurance, and they have a $20 million house out in the Hamptons. And if it goes away, that's okay. They're not going to be looking for as much assistance from government authorities. And I think that's the real challenge with communities that are on water or on islands that have more of a threat from rising tides and rising sea level.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah.
Anything else, Michael?
Well, I have a class in half an hour, and we promised to hold our only till 1. So I think I'm reluctant to stretch things further out.
But I thank you, Sarah. This has been really fascinating and
Absolutely.
really interesting. I'm excited to read your book and to see the progress on your project. I think it's really important and necessary. And I think education is super important in getting this out to everybody, that they may not be a planning expert, but I think it's a great resource for everyone.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you guys' time. Good luck with your show. And thanks for allowing me to talk about the National Zoning Atlas. See you
Thanks,
guys.
Sarah. Good luck with everything. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Somebody-